Okay, well, starting the introduction to safety and introduction to OSHA here. And the main thing here is to understand the nature of OSHA. So let's see if I can get this thing going. Yes, we're going to talk about the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, and the OSH Act, which is also sometimes abbreviated as OSHA. And how that fits into safety. So most accidents are caused by carelessness, poor planning, lack of training, or a combination of that, and failure to follow safety regulations. So we have OSHA's regulations, and then you have company safety regulations, which have to at least meet, but they certainly can exceed OSHA's minimum standards. And then safety programs are required, or safety companies are required to have safety programs, particularly if you have more than 10 employees. Now, OSHA doesn't say you don't have to have a program if you're just a small little company with less than 10 employees, but you don't have the same burden of having written records until you have more than 10 employees at any time during the previous calendar year or this year. And so that's kind of an important record-keeping thing to keep in mind. Unless you're on a special naughty list where you are told that you shall keep records, maybe because you've already gotten in trouble with OSHA. So companies are required to have a safety program. And so who establishes your safety program? And that's kind of what this first asterisk pair is really about, where it's highlighting something that could be turned into a test question. Who establishes your safety program? It's your company, not OSHA. They don't establish anything. They just, they only come and investigate and have complaints when your safety program is not adequate. And that means having company-appointed competent persons that are in charge of managing that safety. So that's why we have safety officers. So competent person is a terminology that's saying that you're competent, you understand the topic, whatever it is you're managing as far as safety. And you could be competent in many different areas or just one. But who decides who is the competent person? Who deems whether you're competent? Ultimately, it's the company. Now, a smart company will have training and credentials that they require in order to just determine and decide that you are competent. But ultimately, that's the company's responsibility to figure out. So when we talk about a competent person, that's somebody who's been given the authority by the company. So I know I'm giving you a bunch of wording here, but so the smart thing is we talk about qualified people and competent persons. The smart companies make sure that their competent persons are also qualified persons. Okay, so here's a typical competent person. Well, no, he's a town drunk in my dad's old mining town back in the 40s when that car was new in the background. Yes, okay, so maybe not. But when I started trying to get a picture, that was all I could think of. The 10 basic rules of safety. Well, use your tools and equipment and PPE the way they were designed. Wear your hard hat and safety equipment at all times where required. The third one is probably going to show up as a test question near you along the way in various ways. Inspect your equipment daily, no matter whether it's tools or personal protective equipment or whatever. Only perform tasks for which you have been trained. Number 5, understand and accept your company safety rules and policies. So, accepting your safety rules and policies, well, sometimes they're not. You can have a legitimate beef like this fella here. But anyways, the idea is that very often the resistance to change, the resistance to follow rules is what gets people in trouble. Take responsibility for yourself and your coworkers. So everybody has an ultimate responsibility for safety on the job site, but you have a special responsibility for safety when you are in management. And of course, if you're in construction management, you are a manager, you're a part of management. If you're a safety officer, a safety technician, you are also part of management. So you have a special responsibility for safety when you are managing others. whether you're just a crew leader or a supervisor or superintendent or a project manager or a safety officer of some sort. Number 7, correct or report unsafe conditions to your supervisor or competent person. Well, sometimes that's you. So, but everybody has a boss usually. So you go to your next level. Number 8, accept the zero accident philosophy. And what does that mean? Well, it means that the idea is the goal shouldn't be to just reduce accidents. It should be you're admitting defeat if you just say, oh, yeah, we'll have some accidents happen and we'll accept some. No, you're trying to have zero accidents. Yes, stuff happens. There's going to be accidents. Oh, I just said it. But the zero accident philosophy is a full philosophical point of view that you are keeping every single accident from happening. That's your goal here, and that's what you're focused at. Not some accidents can happen to be all right. Okay. Number 9, get involved with your company safety program in some way. And then number 10, when in doubt, stop and ask. Most of the time, we all have a tendency to not want to open our mouths and let people know we don't know stuff. So we keep quiet and pretend we know stuff. Or better or worse, really, I guess you'd say, is that people fake it until they make it and they pretend that they know stuff and they spend a lot of time talking, but not a lot of time listening or asking. So nobody knows everything, and nobody knows everything all the time. I've known things that I've forgotten that I have to go back and review. And so, you need to get comfortable with the idea of sticking a pin in something, or let's set this aside. I'll tell you I'll let you know what I find out when I do a little more research on this, or whatever. You want to find ways, or better still, what I like to do is to carry around a little notepad in my pocket and a pen or pencil so that when I think of something that I'm not sure about, I write down that information so I check it, I Google it later. That said, on a job, when it comes to missing instructions for something that's going on right now, no, you need to ask. Forget your pride. Hey, listen, clarify this for me, please. Some bosses are notorious for not giving information, for holding back information with the idea that gives them power. Instead of what an effective manager does is share as much information as reasonable to keep the job going where as many people understand what has to happen as possible. Okay, well, I'm digressing here a little bit, but okay, so when in doubt, stop, ask, speak up, like this poor guy should be doing. He shouldn't be just holding a target. Okay. Okay, so Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, they determine compliance to minimum requirements, minimum standards, the bare minimum. Sometimes there's things that you think, oh my goodness, these are strict rules. But there's some other things that you may not be aware of are just not as strict as they should be. So there are things that we have in OSHA's minimum standards that if you're following them to the letter of the law, people are still going to be getting hurt because they are not completely as adequate, because there's politics involved. There's pushback. Let me back up to this again. Second bullet here, individual policies. Individual company policies determine best practices, and those best practices have to at least meet OSHA's minimum standards. But there's plenty of cases, particularly when it comes to fall protection, when OSHA's rules are just the bare minimum, and that many companies and many plants that you may work in and job sites where the fall protection rules in particular are stricter than OSHA standards. OSHA requires one form of fall protection. Plenty of times where you have scaffolding and you are tied off at the same time. By using that language, what I mean is that you're wearing a safety harness and you're tied off to some support point with your lanyard, and that's fall protection. That's all OSHA requires, and you've got guardrails, and you might even have safety nets or. So yeah, that's best practices that exceed OSHA's minimum standards. You are in compliance with OSHA standards when you meet all of their minimum regulations, but it doesn't mean you're making your job site safe necessarily. OSHA was created in 1970. And what their job was is to ensure a safe and healthy workplace. Before them was MSHA, the Mining Safety and Health Administration, that does similar things, but for mining. And so they were first, and they have much sharper teeth, but they only deal with miners. So OSHA doesn't deal with mining, but they deal with everybody else who works in this country. Let me kind of skip along here a bit. Yeah, the formal name of the OSHA Act is the William Steger Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970. It took a year to get it implemented, so they opened their doors a year later in the spring, in January 28th, I want to say. Sorry, not January, April 28th. Anyways, that doesn't matter. I'm not making any of that stuff test questions. But this middle section here where it says OSHA's mission, well, that's a test question in the waiting here. So OSHA's mission, what is it? It's to ensure a safe and healthy work environment in the workplace. Or safe and healthy work environment for America's workers is another way of describing it. And they say, why do you have to say that? Well, that's their jurisdiction, the United States of America. OSHA has no say on what goes on in Canada, where I grew up, or in Mexico. It's the United States of America in any of their regions and areas. And I want to say, I forget. But anyways, the point here also is that, okay, OSHA adopts and enforces safety regulations. So when they're talking about these safety regulations as a book or a collection, they call them standards. The whole book can be called the code. So we sometimes talk about the OSHA standards as the Code of Federal Regulations as part of that. And but there's more codes than just OSHA's regulations called that. But CFR, Code of Federal Regulations. And so when we actually refer to the construction standards, which would be 1926 for shorthand, that's the basic code numbers for the whole code for the construction standards for OSHA. Then they can typically called Title 29 CFR 1926. That's Title 29 Code of Federal Regulations 1926. That's the construction standards. Then the general industry standards would be 1910. So the general industry standards cover everyone that OSHA covers. That's the general rules. It's a thicker book than the construction standards. And then so we call it a horizontal standard because it covers everybody. And then meanwhile, the construction standards are considered vertical standards. They only cover construction workers. So if you are specifically doing construction work, not just construction workers, but specifically doing construction work, that activity, then that falls under the 1926 construction standards. So Title 29 CFR 1926, or just 1926 for short. Okay, so OSHA lets you know their website, which is www.osha.gov, not .com. You go to .com, you get to a safety, PPE safety website or something. Some guy that was smarter than OSHA was for that. There's an 800 number for emergencies, which is 1-800-321-OSHA. When by emergencies, I mean when somebody has died on your job site, occupational death, or there's been a hospitalization that's related to occupational work. And so then you have to call them. So you can get that. Okay, so I mentioned the general industry standards. There's something else that not to be confused with general industry standards called the General Duty Clause. And under this General Duty Clause, its section numbers, there's only two section numbers I want you to actually know, and they're not like the ones I'm talking about, which were 1926 point something or 1910 point something. The General Duty Clause section number is section 5A1. And they always put the A in brackets and the 1 in brackets. And here's what it says. It says, and actually in its original language, here's what I've got here. Its original sexist language says, each employer shall furnish to each of his or her employees employment in a place of employment which are free from, and here's the real important part, free from recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm to his or her employees. So think about this. Yes, the first part is just preamble. Each employer shall furnish to each of his or her employees employment in a place of employment. That's just a preamble, okay? Which are, and then here's the important part, free from recognized hazards. Who gets to decide what a recognized hazard is? OSHA. So not us. Recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm to the employees. So what is, we're not talking about simple paper cuts or a sliver, splinter, or whatever. We're talking about serious things here. So if there's possibility of death or dismemberment or serious physical harm, toxic exposure, something like that, something more permanent and life-threatening or injury-threatening, then that's where this comes down. And so it's not just anything, but at the same time, we're talking about causing or are likely to cause. And again, who gets to decide that? Not you and me. It's going to be the OSHA inspector. So this general duties clause has become a catch-all phrase that is used for citation if OSHA identifies unsafe conditions for which no regulation exists in their language here. So yeah, if they can't figure anything else to cite you for within the OSHA standards, they don't need that. They can just use this. So when somebody asks you, where does it say in this book, pointing to the OSHA standards, that I have to do what you're saying, you don't have to look too far. You can go to the first page in the addendum in the back of the OSHA standards book, the first page in the addendum section. After all the other sections, they got kind of an addendum, glossary, and a bunch of other things in there. The addendum page is right there in the middle of that page. And it basically is all about employer responsibility to have a safe job site, basically. Okay, so that's enough drama here for that. Yeah, OSHA has they divide up the whole country into regions, and so we are part of Region 6. So right next door in Region 4 across the border in Mississippi and beyond. But Region 6, so it means that OSHA kind of polices that region in that way, Region 6. But it also has something to do with the training and how it's divided up. And so we have different OSHA education centers across the nation. Here in Baton Rouge, off of Blue Bonnet, we've got, OSHA offices. Okay, so who's covered by OSHA? Remember I mentioned mining is a separate thing. So Harry Adams, a miner at Below Ground Inc., is he covered by OSHA regulations? The answer would be no, because they're part of mining, MSHA instead. Adrian Smith, one of 3 employees of ABC Landscaping. Well, yes, they're employees, and landscaping would be covered. Heck, somebody flipping burgers at McDonald's is covered by OSHA. Somebody working as a clerk at Sears, or if that's the thing, or JCPenney's or Walmart, they are covered by OSHA. Okay, look at Taylor Dell, an accountant in business for herself. Do you think she would be covered by OSHA? Not necessarily. And the reason I say that is because if you're self-employed and you are completely in control of what happens in your day, you're not under somebody else's control, then you don't have to worry about OSHA. You should still follow those basic principles, although in accounting, it can't be too dangerous compared to construction. I guess you could get a disgruntled customer, and that might be bad, but does that really fall under OSHA? No, I don't know. Anyways, but when Taylor Dell has employees, then she has to worry about following OSHA rules, not for herself per se, but for protecting your employees. So once you have an employee, a single employee even, now you have to follow OSHA rules. Rob Jones, one of 10 carpenters working for Woody Inc. What a name. Okay. Yes, because, so yeah, certainly construction falls under that, but other things besides construction fall under OSHA's rules too, that sometimes people don't even pay attention to or think about, because, you know, some jobs are safer than others, and so doesn't even come to mind. Anyways, that's interesting. The mission of OSHA, here it is again, written a little differently. Like I said, the mission of OSHA is to save lives, prevent injuries, and to protect the health of America's workers. There's two sides to the coin of safety: occupational safety and occupational health. Safety and health, safety and health. Safety means you're protecting people from being physically harmed in various ways, including an explosion where the shrapnel comes at you or the shock wave comes at you. That's physical harm. The fire, that's physical harm from being burned. But then there's health from disease, exposure to dangerous chemicals and toxics that can absorb into your skin, or you could breathe in and do harm to your body. And that's on the health side. Protection during an injury, this bloodborne pathogens, and you got to make sure that everybody who's working on that person and everybody who could be exposed to the bodily fluids of others, blood or other fluids, the bloodborne pathogens, being protected from those. And so that's an aspect of health also. Okay, so let's see here. You have rights under OSHA, under the OSHA Act. You have a right to a safe and healthy workplace. Or you have a right to know about the hazardous chemicals being used on your site and know how to use them safely. Step point 3, information about injuries and illnesses in your workplace. You have a right to know about them. And so your company is required to post documents where all employees can view them every year for the previous calendar year. So for last year, 2022, 2023, whatever year it is, your company would have to post the records from that year where you can see them at a common place where they're available for you to see, between February 1st the next year through April 30th. So for the month of February, March, and April, they have to be posted. Nowadays, I think probably done on a website for you to see. But, and so because I know that it's difficult on certain job sites to have postings like that. If it's easier to do when you got an employee bulletin board that you go past every day in a shop or something, then you can put the minimum wage poster, the family leave poster, the various other kinds of things that are required for employees to have posted for them to view if they're right about their rights and such. And this is one of them that has to be posted, an OSHA poster. And this, the record of your safety record of how many deaths, hopefully none, how many of this kind and that kind of injury or illness. You have a right to complain or request hazard correction from the employer. You have a right to training so that you know how to use the equipment or the tools you're using. You have a right to see your own personal hazard exposure and medical records. By the way, those records have to be kept protected for 30 years after they leave your employment. Next bullet, you have a right to file a complaint with OSHA. Okay. You have a right to participate in an OSHA inspection that's happening on your site. And the last point relates to the second to the last, or the third to the last, I guess you say, about that filing of a complaint. You have a right to be free from retaliation for exercising safety and health rights. When you speak up about something that's dangerous, you have a right to be free from retaliation from that by your employer, which means that then you have a right to file a complaint with OSHA. So that's ugly. Well, it's too blurry to see on the screen, but this poster should be part of your employment bulletin board somewhere on your job site or your work site or your office or something. And it basically spells out the employee responsibilities at the top and the employer or employee rights at the top and your employee responsibilities down at the bottom, which basically was the general duty clause. Meanwhile, the Section 11C is part of your rights that I just spelled out here on this page earlier. So if I back up, so yeah, you got the general duty clause, Section 5A1. I've got it here written again. Then I'm trying to clip along here to, I mentioned here about, here it is in writing, OSHA record keeping rule requires most employers with more than 10 employees to keep log of injuries and illnesses, written records, our safety plan. There's a bunch of written records that are required by the employer. And so these are things that in management you're going to have to comply with. And yes, you don't need to learn it all at once, but if you're starting your own company from scratch, you've got to start paying attention to these things. So, and if you're part of a big company, there's somebody doing it, but as there's turnover, that has to be, those responsibilities for maintaining these things have to be passed on to others. Okay, so let's see here. I'm skipping along a little bit here. Okay, I'll get to it here. Right, there's a bunch of extra stuff I've got in here. Okay, but this is where I was trying to go. The bold-faced third bullet on this page. You have a right to be free from retaliation. This right is spelled out in the other OSHA standard I wanted you to know the number of, besides the general duty clause, section 5A1. That's this one. For this right to be free from retaliation is spelled out in section 11C of the OSHA Act. You have 30 days to contact OSHA if you've been punished or retaliated against, to complain about that. So you can file that as a complaint after that. If you've been, let's say, demoted or given lousy work because right after, so you got to have some proof of this. But the point is, it's enough to keep some of this hanky-panky from happening, especially if, well, only if they know these rules. But people that are involved with management are supposed to know these basic fundamental rules and regulations and rights. That's part of why you have it in your construction management degree. And of course, when you're a safety officer, it's very important that you understand that you can't retaliate against people, and you can't be part of it. And you want to make sure it's not happening. Your employer's responsibility is to not discriminate against workers who exercise their rights under the OSHA Act, Section 11C. Okay, that's enough of that. I'm going to skip along till I get to, there's extra stuff in here that I really should be getting out of here. I'll be covering it later, but I just wanted to get to the main part of the presentation again so we can finish this out in a timely fashion. I mentioned this earlier, but I didn't give the details of how much time you have. If a worker has to be hospitalized for work-related incident, not just taken to the hospital for first day or to be diagnosis or checked out, get x-rays to be sure everything's okay. That's fine. That's diagnostic stuff. But if you were admitted to the hospital as a patient, not just going in and out of the emergency room, OSHA must be contacted within 24 hours of you knowing of that. And you can't just plug your ears pretending you don't know. And if a worker is killed, occupational fatality, OSHA must be notified within 8 hours of you finding out about that. So you've got 8 hours to contact OSHA for fatalities, and you've got 24 hours to contact OSHA for hospitalizations. These are things that can show up on the test. They will show up as OSHA record keeping issues and such when we get to the end of this thing too. We're dealing with OSHA record keeping. Accident investigations typically happen. If somebody's been hospitalized, OSHA wants to be contacted because they're going to come out and do their CSI style investigation of you to find out what happened and what could have been done or what can be done to keep that accident from ever happening again. So that's what accident investigations are for. They're for fact finding, not fault finding. They're really about accident prevention, not finding someone to blame. So it's all the same stuff. So that can be turned into a testable point too. So there's 3 possible test questions on this one page, or things that can be turned into test questions. And when you take my quizzes that are in this course, you're going to be drilling on these kinds of things to make sure that you know the questions, and you know the proper answers, so you can do well in the tests. If OSHA and compliance officers find any violations on a site, they may issue a citation, which is the piece of paper that informs you of the regulations and standards that have been broken, right? So that's what a citation is. You see that in the red asterisks on this page. The penalty, of course, is the money that you pay. Now, in a speeding ticket for a policeman, or a police officer, you're going to get a piece of paper right there. That's your citation or your copy of it. Whereas in an OSHA issue, when an OSHA inspector comes on your site, you won't get that piece of paper that day. It'll be prepared by the area director later at the head office and sent to your company by registered mail to be signed off for. So it's a little different process, but I'm giving you more detail than you need here right now. Best practices, I mentioned them before, but the rules and safety procedures that the industry considers to be the best available, practical, safe method. Best practices tend to evolve over time and tend to take a proactive approach to safety. And so they evolve over time. So our definition of what was considered best practices or acceptable behavior and such, mainstream safe behavior, used to be different. We didn't always have hard hats. We didn't always have safety harnesses. In fact, the first safety harness was just a lap belt, which isn't very good. You can slip out of that pretty easily. But it was better than what they had before, which was nothing. So safety procedures, hard hats, gloves have gotten better, more accepted, enforced, and required. Training for operating forklifts, for instance, is something that's required now and policed fairly heavily. So whereas when I started, which was many, many, many years ago, my first time on a forklift, the training consisted of, you ever use a forklift? Which was a lie. And then I just figured it out. Nowadays, you can't do that. Not easily. I'm sure it still happens in places, but mostly probably on family farms and stuff. Nothing against the farm. I'm just saying that where there's not too much scrutiny. So best practices certainly have evolved over time. And I could tell you some stories, but okay. So this is not a best practice, right? Oh my goodness, that's a lot of lumber on that little car. See those back wheels and the bumper dragging? Oh, and if you could see a little better, if I had a better quality picture to show you, there's bags of concrete in the back seat. So it's worse than it looks. Is this a best practice? Well, no. And actually, I know the guy sitting down in the back there laughing away. Now, probably the reason they could get away with this is they had a GFCI at the house that this one was plugged into. But, you know, the safety flip-flops floating the power strip and a little block of wood to keep the other extension cord from falling. And that's not enough. But here's the thing is that people can do dumb things like this and get away with it all the time. And you know, you could get away, you may not get away with it on the first time and everything goes horribly wrong, or you may not get away with it on the 100th or the 500th time, but something eventually will go wrong. Murphy's Law will kick in eventually if you keep doing something like this. So accidents are caused by unsafe acts and unsafe conditions. So this terminology or this philosophy or a way of looking at accidents and the causation of accidents is important. We talk about either it's the unsafe acts or the things that we do or we fail to do, our own actions. So things that you do or do not do can cause an accident. That's our actions. And then the conditions are something about the job site that's dangerous, what NCCR likes to call external factors. So when they talk about external factors, make sure you think, okay, no, they're talking about unsafe conditions about the job site, something about the site that's dangerous. You've got tripping hazards, you've got exposed wires on some equipment or a frayed extension cord or a missing guard on a table saw or a stuck guard on a skill saw, circular saw. Those are unsafe conditions, but they can combine together. And so when you start using that saw that's got a stuck guard on it, that's an unsafe act. And so they can go hand in glove and hopefully stay hand attached. But anyway, so horseplay would be an unsafe act. Things can go horribly wrong when you pour something down this guy's back or a person's back while they're pulling the blade toward themselves. They can take off their hand or their finger. Here's an unsafe condition. Well, this is a real life situation where some guy was supposed to go shimmy inside that culvert to turn a valve and said, I think I see something in here. And they pulled out this bundle of joy, rattlesnakes. So yeah, an unsafe condition, unsafe acts and maybe unsafe conditions here. So yeah, this guy is soaking wet up to past his belly button on the left. he walked through the water in his bare feet with an extension cord and a AC powered drill. And, but he's got his safety glasses on. He's in bare feet, but he's got his safety glasses. So that's an unsafe condition, unsafe act. An unsafe condition would be having a fire extinguisher that's spent. Then when you need it, it's not there for you. Or if it's tied with a wire, you shouldn't need wire clippers or have to unwind a wire in order to use a fire extinguisher. Either one of those things. Freight extension cord, that's an unsafe condition. Of course, over on the right-hand side, we've got an unsafe act when you start using that contraption to change light bulbs. So besides the causes of accidents, we talk about the direct cause, not cost, but causes. The direct causes, the level one level of accident causation is just the fact that he maybe fell off that ladder thing. Then the indirect causes can be things like, okay, he wasn't wearing fall protection. That's an indirect cause. It seems pretty direct to you and me, but that's considered an indirect cause of an accident. That's an unsafe act or an unsafe condition like the freight extension cord. Those are level 2 level of accident causation. And then the level 3 level of accident causation is root causes of accidents. So if there was no policing to make sure that somebody was wearing fall protection, you don't have any safety officers involved, that makes it a root cause of an accident. If there's no safety training or there's no fall protection equipment provided, that's a root cause of an accident. So what happens is in accident investigations, and that's what we're talking about also here, is that the accident, what you're really looking for are the root causes, because you're trying to figure out a way to keep those accidents from ever happening again. That usually means change. It comes back to management. So the causes of accidents are ultimately the responsibility of management. Anybody involved with management has an ultimate responsibility for preventing the accidents from happening. We all do, but when you're in management, you are more under the crosshairs for this. I'm not trying to scare you away from construction management or from safety management, but just understand that that you have a special role to play and special responsibilities. And so root causes of accidents, when you can find, and real change of policy. So now everybody must be trained. Now everybody must be wearing fall protection, and you've got somebody walking a safety cop beat to make sure that they are wearing their fall protective equipment while they're at elevation. That changes everything. That's you're changing the whole process so that that kind of accident can't happen anymore unless that system breaks down again. So then there's the costs of accidents, and that's what I started to go to a moment ago. Costs are different from causes. They kind of rhyme almost, but higher insurance costs. When we say that safety pays, it really pays because workers' compensation insurance is so expensive. And the costs of accidents, the medical care, the project and equipment repairs from damaged equipment or the project being destroyed by the collapse of something, the downtime, the cost of the actual investigations, the fines from OSHA, the lawsuits, the increase in your insurance premiums for having the accident, all of these things. So there's companies that used to be in business that are out of business because they had a horrible safety record that eventually caught up with them. Shut them down. They couldn't compete with companies. If your cost of doing business goes higher because of all these additional costs, you're not going to be able to compete. You're not going to be able to get the jobs. Plenty of companies that used to work in the petrochemical industry in the plants around here, where a lot of the lucrative construction work is, aren't there at the table. They don't even get invited to the bid table to bid the jobs unless they have a good safety record. Only the very safest companies get to work in those plants. Okay, so the costs can be classified as direct costs or indirect costs. The direct costs are generally insurable, and the indirect costs generally aren't. So certainly at the bottom of the list, your image, your morale, your reputation of your company are destroyed, and they are not insurable costs. BP, when people think about BP, British Petroleum around here nowadays, they think about the great oil spill of 2010 that caused a huge mess that's still floating around there, flavoring our shrimp forever, sadly. Okay, I digress. Last couple of little sections in here. Back injuries. Back injury accidents are some of the most common and costly, accounting for 25% of all construction-related injuries each year. So 25%. You need to remember that number. So remember, in this course, remembering the numbers is maybe half the battle here, because you can reason out a lot of these questions in a test with common sense, but you can't. You either know the number 25% or you don't. Or you either know the standard number of Section 5A1. That's the general duty clause. You either know it or you don't. You either know that the whistleblower law is Section 11C. You either know it or you don't. And so these are the things where otherwise you'll be guessing. So this is a course that's easy to do well on these tests if you just spend a little effort in some of these factoids along the way. And doing the quizzes more than once is one of the best ways to review and rehearse. You get points for doing them, and you'll get a 0 if you don't do them. But it's easy to go back and take those tests as many times as you want, and your highest score will be saved. So there's really no excuse for not getting 100% on them. Ergonomics is the study of how people are physically affected by work-related movements, motions, and postures. So work-related movements, motions, and postures. That's ergonomics. If you're doing the same thing day in, day out, you're going to wear out that body part. And so one of the things we have to do is focus on protecting workers from repetitive motion injuries, repetitive motion or exposure injuries from vibration for long periods of time, like running a palm sander. After a while, you'll be numb in the hands from a simple palm sander. Well, that's not a very big piece of equipment, but a jackhammer is. And beating your body to death with a jackhammer, you need a break. And so you need to use the anti-vibration gloves, and you need to rotate fresh meat, fresh workers into those positions. You don't keep the same person on that all day long, because that can turn into a medical claim, which means it's an OSHA recordable event, which affects your safety record and your bottom line for your company. So safety pays when you have a good safety record. Safety cashes in on you and it hurts you if you are not following and having safety rules and regulations, and your company will not do well. Okay, so let's see here. So this guy is lifting with his legs, not his back, right? You got to keep your back as straight as you can while you're lifting heavy loads. Well, how can you tell? He's got too much fur. Hey? So even if you look at this drawing here, even in this cartoon, the guy's back is bent to some degree. You have to, but you have to be careful about bending sharply at any point. You're going to want to keep a gentle bend and do everything you can to lift as vertically as you can, lifting with your legs and not as much with your back. And you avoid twisting action, because that's where you can really get in trouble when you start twisting. You try to keep your back straight as opposed to doing any twisting action when you're carrying heavy loads. And then we often have policies that are becoming more and more so that you have a basic policy that nobody's supposed to pick up any more than 50 pounds. Well, that's a good rule. It probably works most of the time, but I bet you there's people that you and I both know that shouldn't be picking up 25 pounds. And there's people that could easily pick up hundreds of pounds. So 50 pounds is kind of a simpleton rule. That's fine, but just understand what it really comes down to is knowing your own body. And the only way you know is from doing, and if you don't use it, you lose it. So when it comes to exercise, if you're not getting it, then you're probably got to be a lot more careful about what you can pick up, because in my mind, I'm still 29, but the reality is I'm a lot older than that now. And I keep thinking I can do stuff that I could do when I was 29 or 19. So proper lifting skills prevent many back injuries. So the question, or the thing that can be turned into a test is down below the gerbil here. It says lift with your legs, keep your back as straight as you can. Okay, so then I've got a summary at the end of here. In general, The best summaries aren't here at the end of these presentations. It's in the study guide that I have for each topic. And at the end of each week, I've got a compilation of all those little study guides together. That's in a printer-friendly version. So at the end of each week, look for the study guide for week 1, the study guide for week 2, that sort of thing. That's what you need to focus on. Or the study guide for each exam, depending on how I've got it organized, depending on the course. The second bullet, I just want to point out, okay, well, let's look at the first one. I'm not going to go through all of this, but on page 2 here, it says, OSHA adopts and enforces safety regulations, rules and procedures that are known as standards. But if they talk about it, if you talk about the code of federal regulations, yes, they're called standards, but the individual policies are regulations. Collectively, they're known as standards. And when you're looking at the whole book, well, it's the code of federal regulations or part of it. But the code of federal regulations doesn't just include OSHA standards. There's other laws and rules that are part of that. So you see, the if no standard specifically covers a particular safety or health hazard, the general duty clause, this is a third one down, General Duty Clause, Section 5A1, is often cited by OSHA inspectors because it is a catch-all standard. And then the last one on this page, the right of workers to seek safety and health on the job without fear of punishment is spelled out in Section 11C of the OSHA Act. So this is the Whistleblowers Act we're talking about. So maybe there's the more important page in here because there's assignments in this course. And the first assignment in there deals with exactly these two things, the last two bullets on this page, the General Duty Clause, Section 5A1, and the Whistleblowers Act, Section 11C here. But I do want you to know in the second bullet here, where it was talking about the OSHA standards for construction and general industry are known respectively as Part 1926 and Part 1910. If you see a question about that, just beware. That's the only other area that I really want you to know those two numbers. Construction standard is Part 1926, or usually just listed as 1926 for short. And the general industry standard that covers everybody, not just construction workers, is Part 1910. But specifically, as far as individual clauses or individual regulations or standards, there's the General Duty Clause, Section 5A1, and the Whistleblowers Act of Section 11C. Beyond that, yes, I have okay, and I forgot. I put it on its own separate page again. Okay, made it a little fancier. Related to the whistleblowers protection is you have the fact that you have 30 days time to file a complaint with OSHA if you've been retaliated against for speaking up about safety on your job site. 30 days, so it's another number. So that's why I'm drawing it out here. So yes, I've got some stuff in here, but a lot of this stuff, or pretty much all of this, is inside of the study guide for this topic, the first topic. So there we are. How do you like this stack of material? Hey, it's all stacked up pretty high here.